to Genz Matters, where we bring our perspectives to the world. For today's episode, I am thrilled to be joining you guys with Alexia, Suthi, and Jane from the Youth Law Institute. Hi guys, how are you all doing tonight?
I'm doing good.
We are doing great.
Yeah, we're amazing. We're so happy to be here to discuss the Youth Law Institute.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you guys as a part of the episode for today. So, just to start, would you guys mind introducing yourselves and the organization?
Of course. So, hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming and listening to the podcast. So, my name is Alexia. Myself, Judy, and Jane, we're all founders of the Youth Law Institute, which is a nonprofit dedicated to teaching law to youth for the students, by the students, through educational videos and youth sharing their perspectives on various legal concepts and proceedings through articles.
And we do a lot of outreach with recently or coming up, we're going to be doing seminars with other organizations and doing forums where we connect youth and let them network with legal professionals talking about a different legal topic every single month to get the most outreach with the most amount of students. Even if they're not completely interested in law, there are certain venues that they can look at through our organization with connecting through different types of fields in law.
That's really amazing. So, I think that having the seminars to connect with other professionals will definitely be really helpful for many people who are interested in law and for their careers in the future. So, can you guys tell me why you decided to create this organization?
Yeah, so it's actually quite a funny story. We all kind of came together through this fantastic fellowship called the Columbia J-Step Fellowship, and we were all placed into this global forum. And through this global forum, we all met each other. And Alexia was the one that kind of really sparked the idea of, okay, how many of you guys are interested in law, and would you guys be interested in creating a nonprofit? And so we all came together. There were some other members, but of course, running a nonprofit is very hard, especially when you are youth. But we all came together with this common interest of helping people learn about law and legal education. And we just all had this passion for it, a passion for law, a passion for learning, and a passion for helping. And with all of that combined, we created the Youth Law Institute.
Additionally, we also realized that there was not that many legal opportunities for students unless you had connections like interning at a law firm or shadowing a judge. Those are really hard opportunities to get for a lot of youth interested in this field. And so we really thought that with this organization, it's open to everybody, anybody that is in middle school and high school and even college. They can learn more about this very interesting field because we all believe that law plays a role within every aspect of our lives. And so we really just wanted people to know more about this more about the legal field without having connections or having to pay a substantial amount of money to learn, just for the students, by students.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on to that, I think the biggest reason was experiences that the three of us felt in this gap of finding these resources and opportunities to either get volunteer hours or leadership opportunities. And this all just came down to, for us, experiencing a gap in opportunities that we could seek out and kind of giving back to other people that we know are facing those same boundaries in getting those opportunities.
Wow. That's a really cool story of how you guys met and actually came to form this thing. So, were you guys, when you met, were you all interested in the same kind of areas of law, or did you have different kind of specialties that you wanted to focus on more?
I'd actually say I think all three of us were interested in like different aspects. Me personally, I'm pretty interested in like civil litigation and maybe even like corporate business law. And I know the other two can elaborate as well.
For me, I'm very interested in medical malpractice law. For the longest time, I was thinking of which legal field that I wanted to go into, and I even had a professional experience where I got to learn more about security litigation. However, I really am interested in medical malpractice, mostly because I really love science, and I feel like a lot of people can relate where they love science, but then they think, oh, if I love science, maybe I should go into the medical field, maybe just not the legal field. I don't think it's for me. But with medical malpractice, it to me, it makes me really happy to see that there's a science aspect, but also a legal aspect you can put together. And I feel the field is very underrepresented, but very important for people that have been mistreated within the medical field. So I mainly want to go into that.
Yeah, and once again, we all like very different types of law. I want to go into immigration law, become an immigration attorney, and help people come to the U.S. because just like us, everyone deserves a right to a fair and speedy trial. And especially living in the south of Texas, where I am relatively close to the border, there are certain things that are very difficult to deal with immigration. And I just am very passionate about helping people come to the United States to hopefully receive a better life and get better work.
Yeah, and honestly, adding on to that, I mean, just seeing how the three of us have such diverse experiences and interests in law and still coming together because this field really has so much to offer is something that we wanted to inform to other teens and other youth.
I think that that is really, really amazing, especially how even though you all have like different kinds of specific interests in the legal field, you can all kind of find that one common point of saying we want to educate other people. And I think that is really, really cool. So, for Siddhi and Alexia, would you mind explaining a little bit more about what civil litigation and medical malpractice is for those who don't know them?
Yeah, I could talk about civil litigation. That this is a field that talks a lot about discrimination, racial discrimination, workplace discrimination, sexual assault, things like that. And actually, the one of the biggest reasons why I'm interested in that is from professional experience I actually had this summer. I know this isn't applicable to everyone because it is really hard to come across these, but I had the opportunity to work at a civil litigation firm in my city, and it really opened my eyes to all the things. So I live in Cleveland, and it was like one of the poorest cities like a couple years ago. And I mean, I've been pretty shielded all my life, but I think just understanding the things that happen, the ways that people either manipulate people, minorities, and things like that is something that I think is really important and the biggest reason why I was interested in that. But like just to sum it up, it's any sort of discrimination that you can see in all sorts of different fields in like workplace and things like that.
For me, so I was very lucky enough to have a professional opportunity interning at a law firm within my city going over security litigation. And at first, I really wasn't familiar super much with security litigation, but majority of security litigation is dealing, at least for the firm that I worked at, was class action lawsuits. So, and mostly it was companies failing to inform not specifically investors. When I thought of investors, I thought of people that were on Shark Tank, but investors definitely, it's so pretty much for investors, it counts as people that are purchasing a product. And so an example case, let's say a company is selling a product to consumers, and then it's found that the company was lying in the reports that this product was safe for people or that it worked for people. And as a result, they end up getting sued, and the proceeds being class action, it goes back to the consumers that actually paid for the product and were deceived by the company. And it mainly had to do with stock drop and going over specifically about the company, like what they lied about and like how they were deceiving their consumers, and what happened pretty much after the company deceived their consumers. So that was mainly what I was working on with security litigation. I found it very fascinating and because civil litigation can be applicable to all people because products all over the world, I mean, us living within the world, we all use products. So it was really interesting to see that these big companies, they were deceiving their investors. And I got to learn more about class action suits and just more about security litigation. And then for medical malpractice, that is just in any way how people are hurt within the medical field. So this can be, for example, someone going in for a surgery and then a doctor. So there was one case specifically, I don't remember the name of the case, but there was this woman and she went in for surgery and she was having some misgivings about the doctor giving the surgery. They had a conversation before the surgery and the woman was uncomfortable. So she hid a camera in her hair, and actually under the surgery, the doctor was making comments about her body and saying really rude things about her. So that is one form of malpractice. There's additionally malpractice where someone will go in for surgery and they end up getting a surgery that they did not ask for whatsoever. Also, doctors making false diagnosis for them, which is where I'm interested in, because it's happened to me personally, where I go to a doctor and they'll be like, oh, it's nothing, and then it actually ends up being something, and nothing ever happens to the doctors. There's no repercussions. So that would be mainly the field of malpractice. And actually, I recently read a book about malpractice, and turns out a majority of malpractice cases that get taken to court, it's about getting doctors treating patients not like humans. It's mostly just like treating them as like another like patient, like another like condition, not as seeing them as an individual. So with me, I mainly want to just make sure that people are seen and heard for their medical ailments, medical issues, and just make sure that doctors are always treating patients and always listening to their concerns, and not just grouping them and saying like, oh, nothing is happening just because they're in a specific group.
Huh, wow. I personally didn't really have much knowledge about those kinds of fields, specifically in the legal area, but hearing you guys talk about it kind of opened my eyes and really gave me a lot more of a deeper perspective. So thank you. So would you guys want to talk about some of the other main legal practices and fields that are seen in our society today?
So in the legal field, there is a variety of fields, and all of us can agree that there's a field, honestly, for everyone. So whether medical malpractice, immigration law, civil litigation, security law, environmental law, there is a field for everybody. And we honestly believe that there's so many legal fields and that they can be all applicable to everyone in a certain way.
Yeah, I think that like some of the other laws, there's like constitutional law, tax law, intellectual property. So really, for any job that you want to pursue, there's always a legal foundation behind it, because there's so many intricate things that go on. Like you would think like medicine and law are like completely different fields and like different realms completely, but there are different ways that those things intersect with each other. And like even I'm trying to think, there's like IT law, so with computer science, any field there is some aspect of law that intersects with it, and that's what I think is so interesting about this field.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up, specifically talking about how there are so many different fields and branches of law and how anyone can get involved, and there is something for everyone. Because I think when most people hear the word law, they either think about criminal law or law relating on a governmental level, specifically in the Supreme Court. So I think having knowledge that there are more than just those two general fields is really important, and that there definitely is something for everyone. So thank you for talking about that. Would you mind talking a little bit about specifically how law connects to politics? Because I think a lot of people know that the two are intertwined, but sometimes they can get a little bit mangled, or people don't know how they're separated and how they function independently and together.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point to bring up. Law and politics do get mixed up a lot, or they get interchanged. So, kind of how it relates is one specific example is kind of how people draw congressional districts, or how people draw just districts in general for voting. So, that's where kind of law and politics mix together, because there are laws about how much can you actually use for a district? Can you use this part as a district? And so it's important to know that underneath politics, there is a foundation, and that foundation is law. And also, we kind of see it happen in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court it's a court. It involves law, it involves lawyers, it involves cases, but we see how they deal with different political matters. We've seen it multiple different times throughout all the different laws they passed, from Brown v. Board to Roe versus Wade. There's always going to be law as the foundation, and the politics is what comes out of it.
I'm actually glad that Jane brought up the Supreme Court, because like you'd assume, like I know the Supreme Court was, if you like learned about it in like US history or government, the Supreme Court was built to be completely different, or not really associated with politics as much, and be solely about law. So I'd actually categorize that as law. But I think that it's really important to notice that with recent legal proceedings and the way that the Supreme Court is structured today, how much law and politics intersect with each other. just because laws really help us protect general safety and ensuring that we as citizens, aren't abused by the government. And I think law has a lot to do with protecting politics and making sure that whatever or the methods in which politics affects like the people is in a fair way. And law, I think they intersect in the way that law protects the people who are affected by politics, if that makes any sense.
No, I definitely think it does make sense, and I'm really glad that you kind of brought up those parallels, as it gives us more insight into the connection between those. So thank you, Jane and Sudhi, for kind of talking about that kind of connection. So I think that another type of law that most people don't really know much about, but is definitely huge in our entire world today, is specifically international law. So what exactly is international law? And then how does it kind of relate to a lot of the things we've been talking about so far?
So this is something I'm really passionate about. I'm super passionate about talking about international law and just law or just comparative law in general. So international law is going to be stuff like the Geneva Convention or the International Crime Court or International Court of Law. And so that is obviously things on a global scale. So, for example, the Nuremberg trials are a perfect example of international law. We saw how a lot of these former Nazi Party members were brought to trial on the international stage. And we saw that they got charged with a lot of different crimes, like war crimes, for example. So international law obviously affects all of us. It affects the United States. It affects Russia. It affects every single country in the entire world. And international law sets the stage for every single country. Basically, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. If you do this, here are the consequences. If you do this, some of your privileges may be revoked. And kind of going into that a little bit further, comparative law is something that we're actually planning on adding to the Youth Law Institute. I've actually reached out to a lot of our international members. We've reached a lot of different countries, and we're hoping to add some segments about comparative law. So comparing the United States branches of government versus the UK's parliament, or United States branch of government, and how it works in China's government. So I think that international law is something that is super interesting and often difficult to understand because it is hard to understand. It's on a global scale. And so I think it's really important to educate people about it because not only does it affect people in the United States, it affects every single one of us, no matter where we're from.
Those were fantastic points you brought up, specifically relating to not only just the comparative law and how important that is, because I think comparative law, specifically looking at how the US system or any kind of system is different from another country's, it really kind of enlightens people as to the differences and the similarities, but more specifically how we can improve as a system or how we can try and fix a system and change it for the better. But I think something interesting that you really brought up was the Nuremberg trials and using that as an example. So I think several people have learned about the Nuremberg trials at school, whether it comes to a class or a history class, but the way that you kind of applied it was really, really interesting. So specifically relating that to international law is a great case example. The Nuremberg trial specifically had to deal with several countries and their war crimes, and although we haven't seen much of that on a grand scale as of late, it's still a really great example that we can use and apply when talking about international law. So thank you so much, Jane. So the next thing that I wanted to really talk to you guys about are the current events and the current cases that are happening in America's law system today and kind of how that affects our youth. So what are some of the big and important cases that have played out recently?
So currently, as of now, we've been having a lot of issues with human rights cases. Specifically, a lot of people have heard in many conservative states within the United States, there is a lot of censorship going on, specifically in Iowa, Arkansas, and Florida, where a mass amount of books are being banned to prevent indoctrination of children. So we have actually spoken to our members about this case, and we've had articles written about censorship, since we believe that, within this current age, we have access to a plethora of information. And censorship hasn't really been happening since way back. So we thought it was really important to highlight within our organization because we feel information is really important for youth to learn. And if people are not learning necessary information and information that the government thinks like, oh, maybe kids are not safe to learn that, we think it's an important issue to bring up about like what should kids be reading in schools and what shouldn't they be learning within their own communities.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting with the book bans because I know there have been cases and petitions for book bans. I'm based out of like the New York, New Jersey area, and I know some kind of things have been deemed inappropriate or not really aligning with the values of the curriculum. But in general, there has to be a certain like kind of place where we can draw the line as to what is appropriate and what isn't for children. But it's really hard to do that in the first place. I think with books, there's a lot of information out there that specifically youth should be able to learn in order to kind of broaden their world perspective and their horizons. However, the real question is at what point can information be considered too vulgar or too graphic or too out of line? Which is kind of a harder point for us to draw. But I think the really big thing is kind of going back to free speech and being able to publish your own content without having money restrictions is really important. And at the same time, also being able to have certain restrictions that aren't too extreme are important as well. So thank you for talking about that, Alexia.
I definitely just wanted to add a quick thing. I liked how you talked about like the free speech aspect because I think that's something that's really, really relevant and something that's applicable to everyone. And like I know Alexia was talking about like the book bans with students, and like one of the court cases, Tinker v. Des Moines, I think that a lot of people are familiar with the Vietnam War and students who are protesting that. Things like public speech and being able to express your own viewpoints in a school setting is something that's super relevant, like at least today with social media and a lot of teens speaking out about certain things. And I think that law really, really helps kind of uphold your rights. You would think that, yeah, like I'm only 15 or 16 or 17 and don't have the right to vote. But there are ways in which you can have an impact on law and how law can directly impact you as like just as being a citizen.
I think that those were fantastic points you brought up, Siddhi. Thank you so much, especially with like the voting and being able to still make an impact in your community even though you may be younger. Some people may believe that even though we're younger or a part of Gen Z, that we don't really have as much power as those in other generations, or we can't make a change, or just because we're young, we may not be as educated as others. When in fact, as long as we kind of have read the facts and gained a general understanding as to what is actually going on, then we can use our voice and stand up and make a change. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Another case that I would like to talk about is the Held v. Montana case. So would you guys like to talk about that?
Absolutely. So as Studi was mentioning, there's opportunities for youth to get into law, not specifically through professional opportunities. So with Held v. Montana, that is a perfect example. So it was a case where youth actually took the state of Montana to court because they noticed that in Montana, they were doing a lot of infrastructure projects, and Montana had a law passed where in the infrastructure projects, they weren't allowed to consider the environment. Now, a lot of people, especially within Gen Z, realize that it's detrimental not to consider the environment because we see within our society that climate change is already occurring. We've saw in Lahaina, and we've seen already in California with Hurricane Hillary. So we think it's really important just to recognize about these cases. So that's what these teens in Montana did. They took the state of Montana to court, and the court found Montana wrong and the youth's right, and that now Montana has to consider the environment when thinking about cases. So this just shows like that youth can get involved now within more legal proceedings, and not to be afraid to go out and show your beliefs, because we all believe that Gen Z is powerful. I mean, back then, like people probably would have thought like, oh, you know, someone else will do it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, it does, like, whatever. But now youth are really seeing that they can have an impact. And when they come together, they can achieve monumental achievements, such as what just happened with Held v. Montana. So now that they're allowed to consider the environment, now it's going to open the U.S. to have more green infrastructure, more sustainable infrastructure, which is really good and will hopefully also prevent less of a climate impact within the United States.
Yeah, I think that the work that the people in Montana were doing to kind of challenge it, it's really, really impressive, specifically from the point that people may be afraid to kind of stand up, or if they notice that something is kind of wrong or unconstitutional, that they might be in the wrong for speaking up about it. But I think that by speaking up and by pointing out that what they were doing is wrong, they're creating and setting a precedent for others to use for generations to come, which is really, really important and for our youth to know that they are powerful. So thank you so much for talking about that. Are there any other current... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, this isn't really like a current event, but like speaking of like teenagers, especially, like you really don't think that you have a voice in politics, which is true because you aren't allowed to vote, but I think law has a lot of opportunities where you can get involved. There was this one case with a kid named Gerald Galt, and I think he was definitely under 18, but he fought for the right of like a timely notice of charge for children and parents, meaning that anyone under the age of 18 has the same constitutional rights as everyone else who's a citizen. And I think that's really, really important. And I know there was another girl named, I think her name was Deborah, and I don't remember her last name. Start with a W. Sorry about that. But I think she was someone who fought for like the separation between state and like state and religion within her own school. And there are things like that where teenagers themselves can, if they really, really feel the need to, go into like the Supreme Court and fight for their cases. So I think that really brings a lot of voice into, or like what teenagers specifically can do. Like recently with Montana, I think we've seen that in a really larger scale, because a lot of these primary cases I mentioned were like years ago, and I think it's really great what the kids in Montana did. And I think it's honestly, with social media and a lot of outreach going out with these different types of opportunities that teenagers have, we can really only expect more things to come out of that, more kids and teenagers to defy the odds of what's going on in their environment or in their school or any sort of realm that they feel like they're being wronged in. And I think we're only going to be seeing more of youth action in those fields.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that you brought up. Thank you so much. So I think kind of transitioning into more of a different kind of topic. So looking at legal education and how it's being presented in the high school setting and college setting, how would you say that it is being taught in schools, and what would you say that we can do to kind of improve it for the future?
So for legal education, all three of us, we are fortunate enough to live in the U.S. where we have a very good education. I mean, with us, we all have different legal clubs and programs at our school. All of us have participated in mock trial and Model UN, which has really opened our eyes into the legal field and just to give us the ability to learn more about it. We also have AP classes within our school. We have AP US History, AP Euro, AP Gov, which allows us, again, to learn more about the legal field and the legal proceedings within our communities and our world. But a lot of schools may not have access to that. And especially with censorship going on, legal programs could start to be taken away where people are not able to know their rights. And also now we've seen that people may not even know their rights, even just by living in the US. Like I've seen various videos where people will go into the street and be like, how many amendments are there? And people don't know. Or like, how many Supreme Court justices are there? And people don't know. So that would be a big problem, especially living in the US, because like, let's say you get pulled over by a cop, you might not know that, if they're like, oh, we need to search your car, that they need to have a warrant. People might not know that, and they could actually allow the cop to search their car. And so we think that legal education, especially within schools, and even starting in like within middle and high school, is very important for people to know and just be aware about, and definitely to increase that, especially to lower income communities where they may not know about their legal rights living in the US and also internationally.
Yeah, to kind of expand off of Alexia's point, legal education is safety. Knowing your rights, knowing that you have the freedom in some cases to say, no, you can't do this, is extremely important. And I truly believe that legal education should be getting taught to high schoolers and incorporated into some middle schools, because legal education keeps you safe and protected, and it gives you freedom. we are the United States. We have claimed ourselves to be the freest country in the world. So let's keep that reputation.
Yeah, I think you guys brought up fantastic points. It is incredibly important that individuals know their rights, know their amendments, and know no, they don't need to know every single detail, but get the basic understanding of how the legal system works in their country and in their area, because it's very crucial and fundamental. And it's really just important for them to understand their rights as a citizen so that if they come up in or encounter one of these kinds of situations, that they know how to deal with it effectively. So another thing that I wanted to bring up was also how the law kind of how the law differs on the federal, state, and local kind of levels, and how it's important to know the general gist, or if you're interested, you can go further and delve more in depth, but understand just the basic kind of structure of the laws in your area and on a state level, and on a national level as well. Just so legal education doesn't necessarily mean having to go to law school and understand that. It's understanding how to think critically and just knowing the fundamental things in your area in order to successfully thrive and live as a citizen.
Yeah, so I'll explain the different levels between federal, state, and local level. Federal will be the government. So this would apply to the entire US. If the government said, okay, you are not allowed to read, and it was at the federal level, no one would be allowed to read. State level would be only for states. So any state could choose specifically whether they want to follow the federal law or not. So let's say for Roe v. Wade, for example, I noticed a lot that people thought, abortions were banned as a whole, but that would not be the case. That would just mean that states get to choose whether or not people get abortions, and they get to set up the terms and conditions. So that would be the state level. Like, for example, California does allow you to continue getting abortions, but some states will only allow you after a few weeks, or some just don't allow it at all. Local cases would only be for that state specifically. Like, for example, in California now, it's legal to jaywalk, but in some other states, it may not be legal. So that would be the main distinction between three types.
Thank you so much for providing insight into that. I think that being able to understand and distinguish between those three types is very important. And now having that knowledge, the viewers and the listeners for this episode should try and go and understand their local, state, and federal laws. So finally, to conclude, if you had one piece of advice for any student who was interested in pursuing law, what would that be?
My piece of advice would be, don't give up. This law is an extremely tedious and difficult topic, and that's why the Youth Law Institute tries and succeeds at breaking complex topics and cases down. But my biggest advice to any student out there who's struggling, who's going through a hard time learning about law or any subject, is don't give up. Keep pushing through, because in the end, you can do it. In the end, it gets better.
Yeah, and definitely from my personal experience, obviously check out our website. We have a lot of resources if you're interested in pursuing law or just getting a basic understanding of what it entails, and working with us kind of gives you that experience. But on a more professional scale, I'd say that if you are really, really passionate about looking into these opportunities, either at law firms or at a government agency, just reach out. I know that they won't have things on their website specifically catered towards you, but I promise you, if you call them, email them, I know it can seem like you're badgering them, but I promise you, these people are happy that there's a new generation of kids and teenagers who are willing and want to pursue their field. And don't be afraid to talk to anyone. Don't be afraid to ask them, hey, can I shadow you for a day? Or, hey, would you be open to giving me an internship, even though your website says that it's only for graduate students? Like, things like that. Just going out there, being yourself, that's what these either legal professionals want to see, and that's what gets them excited about the people that are going to be I guess being in their job role in the future. That's like what they're honestly excited to see as well.
One thing I would say is, what you think law is, coming as a beginner, if you don't know what law is, then you have like a perception of law and you think that this is what law is all about. you will be completely wrong. When I was younger, I used to think law was just sitting in a courtroom all day, getting to do nothing, sitting in an office, just being bored all the time. But then as I got more interested in this field and I started doing research, there's so many things you can do with law and so many ways you can apply it to your life. It's not just about sitting in an office all day or sitting in a court and just arguing. It is so much more. There's so many things you can do there, whether through different fields, there are different opportunities that you can do. And you don't even have to become a lawyer with a law degree. You can do so much with a law degree. You can do so much. And so I would encourage everyone to be very curious about the legal field and try to expand your knowledge about law, whether learning through current court cases, but also expanding on your rights, and especially within international and United States rights. Learn more and look into your rights and do more research into the legal field, because there is something for everyone. There's so many fields that you can go into. And it can be so much fun, especially with our organization. If you're ever interested in joining, we make it so you can connect with youth about your passion about law, and you can talk about current events with them, and not even just current events. You can also get to know people as a whole. With our organization, it's not really strict like a job. You don't have to just come in, do work, you're done. You actually get to communicate and talk with like-minded students about your passion about the legal field. And like what Sudi said, go out and look for opportunities in law. With Held v. Montana, people, these youth, they came together and they sued the state of Montana. A lot of us can't even imagine suing our own state. So come together with youth, learn more about this field, and just stay curious and be really interested, and also push yourself within the legal field. For me, I had a huge fear of public speaking. I thought I could never be a lawyer. I don't like public speaking. I pushed myself and I ended up actually really enjoying it. So just with your perception of law, always look to challenge your initial perception of something if you don't know much about it. Just stay curious, and also don't forget to have fun. Law can be seen as really strict and just like a straight to the point subject. It is so much more than that. So just stay curious and have fun within this field. And with us, you can connect with so many students. And with us, I know you can definitely find a passion for the legal field.
I think that was the perfect way to wrap up this episode. So thank you so much, Alexia, Sudhi, and Jane, for coming out and talking with us today. So the biggest thing for you guys to do as the listeners would be to follow the Youth Law Institute on Instagram and go and check out their website, because the work and the initiative that they have done and created is amazing. The resources they have provided will help people who are interested in the law field and maybe who have just like a little spark, and they'll be able to find tons of resources and networking opportunities on their website. So thank you so much for joining me today. Also, be sure to subscribe to Genz Matters on YouTube, on Spotify, RSS, and follow our Instagram page. Give us a visit. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today, and have a great evening. Bye, everyone.